Moving along in Kant's critique of pure reason then, the next part of the book is the Transcendental Doctrine of the Elements, which is the core of the book. It's like 3/4 of it. And the first part of that is the Transcendental Aesthetic, which is very short, and it's his analysis of the transcendental ideality of space and time. And he starts off this section by saying that, by giving a number of definitions. The first one is his definition of the word intuition. He uses the word intuitions, Anshang, intuitions, to refer to mental representations, basically, that have originally been derived from sensation. So they come from sensation. And there are pure intuitions. Space is the form of, it is the pure intuition, and there are empirical intuitions, which have been derived from sensory data. And sensory data is the realm of sensibility. But he says that the faculty of representation being affected directly by objects is sensation, and that sensations are empirical, and then the indeterminate or undetermined form of the empirical is the realm of appearance, basically. And that inappearance, which corresponds to sensation, is matter. That is what appears to it, what rubs up against the senses, basically. And that in it, which corresponds to that which can be organized, corresponds to the form. And Kant's whole point here will be that it's the mind that confers the form on the matter that comes to us through the senses. So it's the mind that gives all the formal properties to the things that we experience in space-time. So the whole point here will be the ideality of space-time and of all the intuitions that we experience. They are objective, but they're also subjective. So they're objective in the sense that the propositions that are made in the sciences will have universal validity because he's dealing with the structure of the human mind, the way it's organized, period. Whereas, in fact, as Spengler later points out, he's only really dealing with the a priori structures of the way the Western mind understands experience. But he's treating it here as though it were universal and valid for all time. So he gives these initial definitions here. But the upshot of this, the important point of this is going to be the distinction between things as they appear and things as they are. Things as they appear are known as phenomena. So things are as they appear, as they're conditioned by the human mind, are phenomena. And that's all we've got to work with. We can make objective statements that are valid within that realm, but ultimately we are dealing with human subjectivity, the subjectivity of the human species and its rationality. Whereas, once again, it's really only Western subjectivity, the way the West constitutes any possible object or experience of object for science and rationality that he's really building here. He's going to slowly, as we proceed through the narrative, he's going to slowly build what Heidegger would call a transcendental object, a pure object that will become the sort of X-ray image of any possible object for science, in which Heidegger will critique as being basically in the mode of Vorhandenheit, a self-sufficient entity that's been deworlded, it's been denuded. The way Kant speaks here of these a priori conditions, he's basically deworlding objects and as well as subjects and putting them into a transcendental phase space that does indeed have relevance for science as a universal experience and as the possibility of having a validly universal experience, but it's definitely conditioned by the modalities of Western science. So this is what he's going to call the transcendental aesthetic, not because the aesthetic has to do with the arts, but aesthetic in the sense of sensory experience, and it's transcendental because he's dealing with the pure forms of space and time that make sensory experience possible. And he begins by talking about space. First he says about space that the first thing he wants to convey about space is that it's not a concept, and it's not an empirical concept. It's an intuition, not a concept. And not only is it an intuition, but it's the pure form that makes all other intuitions possible, intuitions being mental representations of phenomena. And it's the pure form that the mind, that is innate to the human mind, it's transcendental aesthetic, it's part of the understanding, but it's separate from its conceptual area. Space is not conceptual, it's not an empirical concept, it's purely innate to the human mind, and the human mind presupposes it. And without it, geometry would not be possible, or at least geometry insofar as its a priori aspect, its necessity and universality, would cease to function if space were not automatically presupposed. And so the way that geometry happens is that in order to perform a synthetic proposition in which we can take the synthetic a priori statement that given any three lines, a figure is possible, the figure being the triangle, one has to produce an a priori intuition in the mind of a triangle in order for that to serve as the basis of the third thing that had corresponded to experience in the basis of that missing X that in synthetic propositions enabled the synthesis of the predicate with the subject. Here in geometry, the synthesis of the predicate with the subject, the triangle that is produced as the result of the three lines, is something that presupposes an intuition, an a priori intuition produced by the mind of a triangle. So intuitions can be produced by the mind or they can come to us from without, but in either case they have to do with representations, mental representations. And in order for the truths of geometry to have universal validity, the pure intuition of the triangle that is produced in one's mental imagination, it has to be assumed that it's simply necessary and universal in order for it to have universality. And the ideality of space as the pure form in the mind that makes the pure intuition of the triangle produced in the imagination impossible, is what confers on geometry its universality, its necessity, and its a priori nature. Space is the pure form of intuition of outer objects. But now here's the more important point. Space is not in things themselves. Space is not part of the actuality of things insofar as they are in themselves. Space is simply the way things appear to us. It's the pure form of ideality. It does have an empirical reality. He is arguing that space and time are empirically real. We do experience space as a real thing. It's just that it's brought by the mind. There's no way to experience things without a human subject there. So, and part of the modalities of what the human subject brings to experience with it is spatial perception. We perceive things as coexistent beside one another in space. It's a necessary precondition of our having any experience whatsoever in the world at all. And so, but space is not in things themselves, and it can't be in things themselves, because part of the larger argument he's going to make is that if space is in things themselves, then we begin to give to metaphysics the validity of a science that it does not possess and cannot possess. And he's trying to actually protect, though he's criticizing metaphysics, he's also trying to protect it from science here. So science refers only to the realm of a possible experience, and space is, of course, the stage upon which Newtonian science unfolds, and so it can't be an attribute of things in they are in themselves. Whatever things in themselves are is forever a mystery to the human mind and cannot be known with any certainty to the human mind. That's the realm of noumena. Noumena means not phenomena. The realm of things insofar as they would be without a human subject, which is a complete mystery to us, and it's the ultimate X, the transcendent mystery that we use the ideas of the reason to try to access, to try to get at through mythology and religion. We try to get at it with these analogies derived from the realm of experience, but we can't say that the analogies are predicates that inhere in the substantiality of things in themselves. So space cannot be said to inhere in things in themselves. It's part of the ideality, the transcendental ideality that the mind brings with it to experiences in order to make them possible, and it also makes the synthetic a priori truths of geometry possible as having universal and necessary validity. And so space has three dimensions, whereas he's going to say here that time has only one dimension. Time unfolds through succession, just as space has to do with coexistence and simultaneity. So he's going to argue that whereas space is the a priori form of the outer perception of objects, time is the a priori form of the inner sense. In order for us to, time is therefore the more fundamental of the two, since it underlies our inner sense of ourselves, and we can't even have a thought without presupposing time as a mode of temporality. We can blink away, if we imagine an object in space and we blink away all of its attributes, its sounds, its colors, we're left simply with the space itself that it occupied. So you can't blink away space, according to Kant. You can't disimagine space because it's built into the mind. Same thing with time. If you try to disimagine or do away with your sense of yourself as a subject, time is still there, enabling you to have that thought. It's there. It's always there as a background presupposition to enable us to have any kind of intuitions whatsoever, any kind of apperceptions, what he calls apperception. Apperception is the ability to perceive one's own self. And he'll also make a distinction between the self and itself, as well as the self as it appears to us. So there'll be a phenomenal noumenal application that applies to the self as well as to the outer world. And so time, it will turn out, will also be the form that makes arithmetic possible, since arithmetical operations take place through time successively, but The problem with that, though, is that everything takes place through time. Reading a book unfolds through time. Listening to music unfolds through time. So I don't see why it would be the case that it necessarily makes arithmetic possible. And he's been criticized for this by the philosophers as well. But nonetheless, time is the form of our inner sense which makes any kind of interior perception possible, since our subjective consciousness always flows through time. And time itself also has empirical reality. Time is a real thing, but it also has a transcendental ideality insofar as it brings time, the mind brings time with it to any experience that happens. And so time, too, like space, is not in things in themselves. It's things as they appear to us, things as they manifest themselves phenomenally to us. And so Kant is making a larger argument here that we cannot know things as they are in and of themselves, only as they appear to us through the manifold of space and time, which is the form of the outer sense a priori, the form of pure intuition, and the form of the inner sense a priori, that enables us to have any experiences in the first place, time being the more fundamental of the two. And Schopenhauer will later say that this is one of the great insights in philosophy, and that he will draw a comparison of this insight with the Hindu insight in the Upanishads, that Maya is the realm of illusion, of space and time, within which things unfold, but they do so in a way that's illusory because Maya covers up the reality of things as they are in themselves, which the Hindus then proceed to qualify. Kant does not assign any predicates to things in themselves. The Hindus do, and they call it Brahman, which means simply energy. It's the ultimate well or reservoir of energy. Everything is a manifestation of a single form of energy, including the gods themselves. They are also manifestations of Brahman. And Schopenhauer will blink out this Brahman and plug in his concept of will, and everything will become a manifestation of will as the thing in itself. And Schopenhauer, unlike Kant, will claim that he has a privileged access, an intuition into things in themselves. They're a manifestation of will to live, a will to exist. Kant doesn't have this. For Kant, no predicates can be ascribed to the realm of things in themselves, the realm of ultimate reality that is forever outside the subjective realm of the stage of space and time structured by the human mind that we cannot ever get to, we can't ever access it. And Kant is also very careful to point out that by space and time he does not mean illusions. Space and time are objective. They're real things, but Schopenhauer will nonetheless draw the equivalent between things in themselves and will and Brahman and Kantian appearance and his realm of Vorstellung or representation, the world as it appears, as guided by and subject to the law of causality and spread out in space-time. So he will draw the equivalence in Kant, and he's the only one of these German philosophers, these German idealists, who makes that equivalency. And so that is basically the upshot of the transcendental aesthetic, which provides us with that third missing thing, not experience, but the innateness of space-time that enables the mind to form the synthetic a priori truths, to synthesize the predicates of geometry and arithmetic with the subjects of geometry and arithmetic, and to have universally valid statements. We don't need to go and find out what the nature of space and time are. It does sound a little bit naive now in our post-Einsteinian cosmos to listen to Kant say that there is no such thing as a simultaneity of time, that time has only one dimension, that of succession, and that there is no simultaneity to it. We know from Einstein that different times happen in different pockets in different places, and that there is indeed such a thing as simultaneity. But I don't think that this damages that there are different types of spaces, and there are different types of temporality, and there are non-Euclidean geometries, does not necessarily undermine the Kantian insight, especially the way Schopenhauer puts it, that the basic insight is that the human mind, we're basically prisoners of human cognition. No matter what we do and which way you cut it, we're always perceiving the world through the veil of Maya, through the a priori forms of our sensibility, and next we'll get into the categories of the understanding that condition this according to the laws of quantity, quality, relation, and modality, which for Schopenhauer is only causality. It's the only category he saves. But the mind really does perceive the world in terms of space and time. There is no such thing as a pure object. If in Kant you blink out the subject, the object goes down the drain right along with it. So this is why space and time do not inhere in objects in and of themselves, but only in the subject, and have validity only for the human subject, even though it is still empirically real and therefore still forms a stage, a kind of human stage upon which the sciences can build objective statements that have universal validity.